All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I know folks are still filtering in. It is great to be here today, as I guess it says on here, or not on this one. I did actually go to MIT, so coming back to campus is always super fun. Although this room in particular mostly reminds me of sorority rush and lots of free pizza from recruiting events, because you're in the student center if that wasn't obvious. But trying to figure out a way to lead that into our discussion here today, and I don't have one, but I think we could just kind of jump into this discussion. A little bit of background on me and why I'm here talking. So I joined Google about a year ago after doing a number of different things, mostly in entrepreneurship and venture capital. But what I do now is lead the product team for Chrome Enterprise. So this is the team that's part of our Chrome org, but thinks about how to take our core, foundational products of Chrome browser and Chrome OS and make them appropriate for enterprise and education customers. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what we're seeing, and then talk a little bit about what we're doing, and then open it up for kind of an interactive discussion today. So talked about this already, but yeah, so we'll go through some of the insights, talk a little bit about Chrome Enterprise specifically. And then we also one other thing we wanted to bring up is just a little bit about what Google does to keep itself secure. Because we too are a big enterprise company and have to think about how we keep our important data and applications and people secure. And so there's some things that we've learned along the way that we're excited to share, and also learn from the folks in this room as well. So I don't think I need to actually tell the folks in this room that we obviously see cyber attacks as very real. These are very familiar headlines, things that we're seeing, whether it's about state-sponsored espionage, financial crime, election tampering. The scale is really considerable. And we're all excited about the move to the cloud, generally speaking, as we move applications and data into kind of cloud environments. It makes it much more manageable, makes it much more accessible, means you can start doing some really interesting analytics, start applying ML. But the downside of that is it can also make it much more vulnerable in new and different ways that we also have to think about how to prepare for. And in many cases, as we'll see here, the vulnerability point to some of our own staff, our own employees, and our colleagues. So we have to think about who are walking around with devices and endpoints that have access to all of this wonderful information. But we've got to make sure that that access is delivered and is offered in a really secure way. So again, guessing with this audience, I don't need to tell you what a moving target that security is, right? The average employee has 3 devices to do their job, over 22 apps. And again, that is very much of a target. And so we know, 98%, I'd love to actually know who that 2% is that of the Fortune 500 that weren't affected by malware. But basically everybody's affected by this. And this is really part of this new attack vector that we're seeing with everything moving to the cloud, which again, it's a very exciting transition, but it's also a very, it's one we need to think about how we actually secure everything for the folks that get there. And enterprise, as you probably know, is in the crosshairs. So we worry about our parents and our kids and the things that they may be getting into, and folks that are taking advantage of potentially their information and helping them stay secure. And those are real threats too. But enterprise is where a lot of this really valuable data is that the hackers are really going after. And so we see that in the data. We see that these professional inboxes, 6.2 times more targeted by phishing, 4.3 more targeted by malware. And this is why we need to make sure for our employees and our staff that we can actually make sure that they're protected and that they're doing the right things. Because we all know that it's easy to leave a laptop behind. It's easy to transfer files where you're not supposed to if there aren't the proper kind of restrictions and protections that are in place. It's easy to leave your password on a sticky note and then have that sticky note kind of disappear off somewhere. So we need to make sure it's actually very easy for folks for the IT organization to protect their employees so that the employees can do the right things. Because if it's too hard or it's too complex or it just takes too much time, they're not going to do the right things. And sometimes they're still going to do the wrong things, not maliciously, just because they're busy and they're just trying to get their jobs done. So we need to make it, we need to protect against those situations as well in the best ways that we can. And so, For IT, that's just an ongoing sequence of attacks and a sequence of things that we need to really address, with usually fewer resources, as always, because we need to figure out how to take on these new challenges, with usually a limited amount of investment. Maybe there's somebody in here who has unlimited budgets, but we haven't found them, and we don't even have them at Google either. So when we kind of break this down into where these threat points and kind of the vulnerability points are, this is really what we see. We talked about this a little bit just a few minutes ago, but it really starts with kind of these sophisticated bad actors. So they're getting, because there's such an opportunity to take advantage of all of this cloud information, we're seeing the bad actors get more sophisticated and really increase in their various attacks. 15x increase in ransomware. These are big, significant changes that we're seeing and that we're trying to help ourselves and organizations protect from. And vulnerable employees. Mentioned some of the ways in which folks can unintentionally end up as a target of some of these attacks. But we mention it and we kind of keep talking about it because this is really where most of these attacks are coming from. It's 90% of the reported breaches are really coming from employees. It's not or coming through kind of employee negligence or extortion or threats. And so these are the people this is the point at which we feel most important about protecting. How can we give employees the tools to do their jobs, but in such a way that the data that they're working with and creating is really protected, and so that your corporate assets remain safe, but your employees still remain very productive. Because the combination, if we don't do this, of these bad actors and vulnerable employees, is what leads to these breaches. And over $2 trillion in global cost by 2019. These are very big numbers with a T, and that's what keeps us all employed, probably at the same time. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to make sure that you're not part of that $2 trillion. So this is where I'll switch gears a little bit and just talk a little bit about what we're doing on the Chrome side to try to help with this situation and to really help ensure that employees are doing the right things and that the proper safeguards and frameworks are around them. So you may be familiar with Chromebooks. You may be thinking, yeah, that's that thing my kid uses. And we've had wonderful success in schools. But there's actually a lot more to Chrome than just kind of what you see being used in the platform. There's a reason, though, that it was very attractive to schools. The Chrome operating system has built into kind of its core that it'd be very secure, very simple, and very shareable. And so some of these core tenets happen to really resonate with the education markets, and we've been very excited to see them heavily used in that area. But actually, a lot of these same things have also been the kind of the foundation and the tenets of what we've now been bringing to the enterprise. So some of these different kind of aspects of this Chrome approach, and I'll talk a little bit more about what it is and why it's different from some of the other operating systems that you guys might have used, is that the security that's in the Chrome OS actually starts at the hardware layer and moves all the way up. We had the benefit of working over the last 10 years to develop this OS, and again, we'll talk a little bit about the specific features, but we could learn a lot from what has gone wrong and what what these new threat vectors are really going after, so that we could close up some of those vulnerabilities and make sure that we could just by design stay much more secure. It's evolving, so we'll talk a lot about our automatic updates, but we have built in a model where the operating system gets updated seamlessly in the background, so that a huge pain point that we see around IT is having to manage patches and updates for the OS, for virus protection, et cetera. It's very distracting to the end user, which means sometimes they don't do it, which leaves the machines insecure. And so we built in updating and how we think about updating down to the core of our operating system. And then granular policies. So this is really what the kind of the enterprise side of this. So we have a solution called Chrome Enterprise. What this is a set of features and capabilities that basically provides management around Chrome devices, as well as additional enterprise features like, say, Active Directory integration. But this is really about helping organizations enable the distribution of fleets of Chromebooks, but making sure that the users, the apps, and the devices are all themselves secure. So we kind of talked about I mentioned really briefly that this is really built into the core, but the different layers of the OS have really are really what kind of enable this this interlock. Yeah, I like this word. This kind of interlocking defense. So everywhere from the hardware side, where we've built particular that we have a TPM chip that we've actually built in house that ensures the signatures at the hardware layer, the firmware. If you're familiar with the way Windows works, how it's evolved over time is that there's a firmware layer and an OS layer, but they're not always updated at the same time. They may be coming from different vendors, and so one of the things that we've done is ensure that these two things are interlocked, which both reduces the amount of kind of threat vector from the outside. It also means that that there's a less of a stability concern, because it's often having those two things out of sync that can drive to a less positive experience for your end users when things aren't seeming to be working right. All the way through to the OS side, and we'll talk some more about our application side and what we do with bringing. We have brought Android applications to the cloud, to the Google Chrome platform, which opens up several million applications to users of these devices, in addition, of course, to the access through the web browser. But the way that those applications get there, and all of the technology that's been built into the Play Store, is actually screens all of these apps before they hit the device, and so that you can have comfort that the devices that you choose for your employees to use have all been screened and can then thus prevent more breaches from things that can, as opposed to something that a platform that would let things be downloaded randomly from the web. And then finally, Chrome OS is really built on Chrome browser. And as you may know, Chrome browser offers in and of itself a whole set of security features, from safe browsing, site isolation, and sandboxing that we can talk more about. So just a few more of the things that we see being used with our OS, but we just think are also good kind of good security tenets and practices and frameworks to think about. One is security keys. So we have kind of built-in integration for security keys. Again, trying to avoid that password on a sticky note, which we might have all been guilty of at some point around along the way, but recognize is not at all optimal. So finding ways to very easily integrate two-factor authentication and the security key, which is embedded into the device but requires the physical touch in addition to, say, a password or other mechanism, has been at Google, and this is kind of one of the things we've used internally, has been a very effective way to reduce reduce breaches. Safe browsing, so we've got mechanisms at the kind of the web browsing layer that can help folks recognize when they're someplace that maybe they shouldn't be or don't want to be, and help them make smarter decisions about where they are on the web. And then, the background updates. One of the ways we've built that OS from the beginning, thinking about updates from the beginning, was we actually put two versions of the OS on every device. And so there's the one you're running, and then there's the one in the background. And so that does us do a couple things. One is when we do updates, we update that other one, so that next time if you've used a Chromebook and you see that little arrow, hey, it's time to reboot, is because it needs to switch over to the new one. But that means it's a really fast, from the user perspective, all they had to do was reboot. And by the way, rebooting is also super fast in the period of seconds. And then they're updated, as opposed to having to go get a cup of coffee, read a few things, who knows what, offline while you're waiting for your device to actually to get updated. And then the other part, of course, is that when you're booting up, the OS can check and make sure that the version you're running on is the version it's supposed to be. And if it's not, it can switch back to the safe version. And so there's just a couple things that we were able to learn from what had happened in these kind of decades of evolution and integrate into the device. And then the App Store. So, of course, we call it the Play Store, so people think immediately of consumer apps, but there is a wide variety, as you probably know, of Android applications that are oriented towards enterprise. And so we've been working with third-party app developers to make sure, that they have a healthy kind of inventory of applications, but also that they work really well on Chromebooks. So clearly there's a different form factor involved, there's multiple windowing, there's some interesting things, so we've been building that into the capabilities to support apps into the core kind of Chrome layer, but then also with the app developers to continue to enhance their apps for this other form factor. And it's one of the ways that we've been trying to bring kind of an easy layer for organizations to say, well, I've got phones, I've got tablets, I've got devices, I don't really want a one-size-fits-all operating system because that often just ends up meaning one-size-fits-none, and then that's not the user experience you want to bring. And so we at Google, that's one of the reasons we have multiple operating systems because they're used for different purposes. But then you can have a single kind of app layer, whether it's through the web, and we're big proponents of kind of pushing some of the new web technologies like PWAs that help build really rich web apps that can work offline, kind of across platforms. As well as then the Android app specifically, which can work, of course, across Android and Chrome devices, and can also bring really great, particularly offline capabilities. So, for example, the Microsoft Office, Android apps work on Chromebooks, great way to access your Microsoft Docs. Of course, we also suggest you move to G Suite, but we know there's still a lot of Office out there, and it lets you use them on an airplane, if the go-go Wi-Fi isn't working like it's supposed to be. So more specifically about Play Protect. So this is some of the technologies within Google Play that helps make sure the apps that reach your devices are secure. Just to give you a little bit, to quantify this a little bit, 50 billion verified apps a day that are being run on various devices, both mobile devices and Chromebooks. Over 2 billion devices protected, and from new apps coming in over 500,000 a day. So this is something that's working at scale. We're learning a ton. You can imagine there's a lot of ML in here that's looking at these apps as they're being uploaded and sort of asking for access to the Play Store. And so we're doing everything we can because we don't want our users compromised any more than you do. So just a little bit more, we've talked about a bunch of these features. One other thing I'll say what this can result in is the operating system actually gets better over time. So I don't know how many of you have a 5-year-old device that you can say is actually faster now than when you bought it. But if you had a Chromebook, you could actually say that. And so although the hardware vendors don't always like that because then it's like, why do you need to buy the new hardware? And we can give you other reasons for why you want the latest and greatest and bells and whistles there. But from an OS perspective, we thought things should actually get better, and you should be able to appreciate that, not have to buy a whole new device to get the latest bells and whistles. And some of the other data around the browsers and kind of how we strive for security, how we measure kind of how we're doing on security, and how we compare that to kind of what's out in the market today. Because we also want to learn from other things that are there and make sure we're incorporating some of those best practices. So we did for this particular side, we actually did a couple white papers that we requested a few white papers from some external security engineering firms to look at the most popular enterprise browsers. So Chrome browser, Internet Explorer, and Edge. And so you can go look at the papers and the methodology, and in fact the code and the analysis on GitHub, so you can see how these tests were run and then what the results were. But from the left, which basically just talks about the fact that we have much higher update frequency, and that's very important because you of course have our standard update 6-week process, but when things happen, sometimes they happen not conveniently right when we're about to do a release. So you want to see an organization that can actually respond quickly and get updates out to folks. But we also saw that from a phishing, catch rate of phishing, that we were able to block more particularly than IE. And then again on sort of how long does it take to patch things? We track those kinds of days because if you're thinking about it in terms of your organization and you're losing money every day that something's not patched and not secured, every day matters. And so that's where we felt like we're also doing well, but of course can always do better, and we're constantly looking at kind of our mechanisms to make sure that things are well secured. And so talk a little bit more about this when we get into kind of the Google model of kind of corporate security, but when we talk about this kind of enterprise layer on top of Chrome OS, we end up talking a lot about what are the policies that we give organizations to manage these devices in an enterprise. And so the way we tend to think about them more holistically is there's user policies. We want to set particular policies around a user. There are device policies, so there's a specific policies for a given physical device, and then there's application policies, which we for the most part tied to the user, saying kind of which users can use particular devices or get pushed particular devices. And I would say even in general, even for our device management strategy, we have a very user-specific set of policies. And The reason for doing this is we think it actually provides a lot more flexibility to the organization if you have your policies following your users versus following your devices. Because the devices may change users, they may change, they may be used by multiple people in kind of some kind of like a sharing environment, say in retail or in a back office, or a user may have multiple devices, and you want to make sure that the policies are very much shared because you know a lot about your user, and you want to make sure that that's where you can actually probably make the smartest decisions about what they should have access to and what they need to have to be productive, in their workday. And so we've put a lot of that intelligence in those policies around the user. Now, we also have device policies, so if you have specific physical devices that you want to have particular controls around, you can do that too. But one of the things that we've tried to do is help organizations move to this more user-centric model, which again we'll talk about with the Google IT model that lets you decide. And if you're wondering what kinds of policies I'm talking about here, it's everything from kind of which apps should get pre-provisioned down to for a particular user, which extensions are allowed, and you can actually define by the permissions that an extension has, like can they access the USB, can they access which are they allowed? If you want to just turn off all extensions that have access to kind of read a website. And so there's things like that you can do from apps and extensions, user policies. Again, who can log into, device ones might be who can log into a device, but then also, are you going to allow, kind of secondary profiles, or is it only my corporate users, or once a corporate user logs into something, can others log in? All of these kinds of things can be set through our over 200 policies that we enable. And we also recognize that we want to integrate with everything that's already out there. When we first sort of showed up, there's probably the usual Google model of, hey, this is our new products, and when people use them, they're just going to start using this. And of course, that's not the real way things work. We actually have to do a lot of work to make sure you can try things and see how they work in your existing environment, and then you can decide what makes the most sense. And we'll just try to do our best to make the options that we provide better than what you've been using, and really moving with the direction that you're trying to move. So we have, of course, an administrative console that you can use to manage all of those policies, but we've been very excited to open up the APIs for all of this capability to third-party EMMs. So that's today including AirWatch, it includes Cisco Meraki, Zen Mobile, and more coming. So if your favorite EMM isn't on this list, just hold on, because most likely it will be very soon. But that means you can manage Chrome devices right next to all the other devices you're managing. So as you're thinking about what policies you want holistically, those can just be propagated out to your Chrome devices like any other devices you might have. We've also been working on our integration with Active Directory. While we have, of course, our identity solutions, we recognize that this is still very significant in the enterprise market. And so we've been working on how you can use your Chromebooks with your Active Directory environment, so folks can log in with their Active Directory logins, and you can actually have all the settings with Active Directory propagated to your Chromebooks. This is we've been excited to launch a lot of the initial features here. I will also say we've got more work to do as we get into more complex Active Directory environments. Microsoft didn't make this easy for us, but we're trying to do our best to kind of reduce those friction points so that you can start to see what it looks like to really use an OS that was kind of built for the cloud and born in the cloud and is designed to make, as you're thinking about your overall organization's transition to the cloud, how can you have an endpoint strategy that also reflects that and is best at securing for the the concerns that moving to the cloud can bring. And so just a few of the common questions that we hear, that we feel like we've gotten good answers for, whether it's, what do I do if I, kind of lose the device? And so we've got a very clear answer that makes it very easy, right? That device that's left in a taxi or an airport or at Starbucks, very easy for you to, not only, of course, it's a device lock, but from an admin perspective, the device can be locked, and so that users would have to re-enroll into the domain to sign in. There may be a guest mode enabled, but these things can be from the admin console can be locked down, and the device is not at risk to anyone picking it up and trying to break into it. having more than one employee access to a device. This is really one of the places we shine from a lot of our learnings in education, where we have classrooms of kids. But again, this could also be in a back office. This can be in a retail setting. This could be in a healthcare setting where you have a device in a single place, but multiple people coming up towards it. And so we have the mechanisms that we provide. So when someone logs in and logs out, and all of their data, not only is their data is encrypted, but when the next person logs in, there's no remnants or any way for them to access the information of the other person. Yeah.
Is that all built into OS, or is that through like an AirWatch or an MDM solution?
That's all built into the OS. And so the way that we and then we have additional management capabilities if you kind of go down to the enterprise path, but a lot of the things I'm talking about are just if you went and picked up a Chromebook from Best Buy and started using it at home, and then one of your family members wanted to start using it, the same thing. Like your information would be completely separately encrypted with your password. It's actually one of the things, if you change your password, it'll ask you both for your new and old password so it can unencrypt the old data that's on the device. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
By merging of the blockchain,
Yeah.
do you have any plan? Because what you're talking about is the existing technology, and all this security goes backhaul to your data center or wherever it is your token is at. What is your plan for blockchain? Because blockchain is very fast, and it's mostly identification of the end users and at the edge side, and it is distributed. It's not like the cloud today is
Right.
everything backhaul to one location.
That's actually a really interesting question that I'm not sure I know the full answer to, because that would probably involve some of our, but I would love to go find out, so I'm happy to take your info and do some more research on this, because that would probably be more of our cloud colleagues who are storing. Let me back up for a second. If you're using a Chromebook, you can pick where you store your files. So they'll be stored locally, but typically you'll have a place that you're also storing them in the cloud. The default, you can pick Google Drive, in which case it would be in our Google Cloud, where I'm going to assume they're doing some interesting things with blockchain, or at least looking into it. And you're making me curious to learn more. But you can pick other, you want to store your files in Dropbox, you can do that too.
The point is, the blockchain does not care where is your data you're designing. It is the identification of each individual in the block of the chain. So they do have authorization on it. When blockchain coming in, all this backhaul identification of token totally is going to be changed. And right now, everybody talks about cloud, but actually it's not a cloud. It's a point-to-point circuit doing industrialization. But when blockchain coming in, distributions, then you do have a cloud. I mean, the connection of machine to machine and individual to the machine.
No, I think you're, yes. I mean, that's fair. I think there's probably some time before we sort out how that's actually going to impact, the use cases that we're trying to design for at this point. I mean, you're certainly right that, the Google Cloud, there are physical Google servers in various different places, and we certainly replicate across that, and have other mechanisms to make sure, it's not the full internet cloud like blockchain would do. But we put in enough, kind of replication and redundancy to make sure that the data is secured, in the vast majority of cases that anybody could come up with. But I think that does open up kind of interesting questions. I mean, for the most part, I think the organizations we talk to are still trying to associate, data with individuals and that access. And so that's kind of the question that we're trying to best answer. There may be some new ways to answer those. We think about like kind of more of a kind of a blockchain model of how we store that data. But I do not yet have the answer for you for how we decide to sort that out. So, yeah.
Just a question. It sounds like a lot of features I wasn't aware of, so that's great. But if you were to take your browser and any kind of typical phishing or malware threat or attack, and compare and contrast that with any other browser, how are your protections real-time oriented, and how do you actually deal with that?
So, I mean, that's actually some of the features. Let's see if I've got that somewhere. Just to talk more, just for the catch rate. I'm not sure, we have a slide actually specifically on the browser. Maybe not. Okay. So basically, some of we have a mechanism that sort of catches in that real time, and this is what's being updated through some of those, some of the ML and some of the other capabilities, that looks and tries to figure out, whether a given website is actually a safe place to visit or not. I think I might have mentioned that one earlier. And so that's the kind of thing that is, kind of most directly updated in real time. I mean, obviously there's got to be some analysis and feedback loop within that, but that's the kind of thing where our ability to kind of, recognize and alert is part of that, kind of very, fast cycle that we're trying to help, that end user make that right decision, whether they should, leave, don't enter anything, don't click on anything, move back. And so those kinds, and doing that through a kind of a visual representation in the browser itself. Is that like what you're asking about?
Yeah, I'm just curious how you see, the biggest vulnerability is obviously the user, but where do you put the weight on trying to embellish tools and augment the tools as opposed to educating users? And I know it's some of each, but
Yeah.
no matter what you do from an education standpoint.
And so actually, there's a lot that's going on, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how we make that user notification. I will actually tell you one of the more interesting parts of my job is trying to figure out, in working with our core platform, browser, or OS team, which of these, because sometimes we may want to give, like on our consumer side, want to give notifications to the user, but this is a notification that maybe in a corporate environment, the admin actually doesn't necessarily want the user to have because they've made certain decisions and they don't, don't necessarily need, a particular, HTTP notification. They don't necessarily want to show that. And so sometimes there ends up, we have to figure out the right kind of philosophy around, well, we want to give admins control over their corporate users, but we still want to give the user the best features possible to help them as individuals stay safe and as the end user. And so trying to figure out the right balance of here's the controls we can give to the admin, but here's sort of the default, which is to actually tell the user as much as possible and try to keep the user as safe as possible. So, generally speaking, we try to just give the user the information to make the right decisions. I would say that was the philosophy, but sometimes you'll find, and you may see this if you're browsing around, and I've certainly run into this, where you can't click through. It just won't let you go. Sometimes it will give you an option to, if you click enough things, it will actually let you through. And so that you're probably seeing right there kind of our philosophy kind of enumerated in that user experience, and we're trying to make that decision as best we can.
To piggyback on that, so is there more fine granular control than just turning off local admin access like you would on a Microsoft system?
Right, yeah, so there's not the same concept of a local admin. I mean, it's more from an enterprise perspective, so it's not a local admin to that device. We're trying to get rid of that whole concept of local, really, I mean, to the extent we can. So all the policies on the device are actually pulled down from the cloud. So the policies are, even for that device, I mean, they're then also on the device, but the kind of the plan of record is on the cloud. So whenever that device is then, if it's been shut down and it wakes back up, it pulls its kind of latest policy, it knows who can log in. If it's a corporate enrolled device, who can, and then what access they have to what once they're logged into that device. So you can set different user permissions and different groups and things like that, and then different folks can have different levels of access. But we've taken out a lot of that kind of concept because that has been such a vulnerability, and we think it just makes more sense to manage these kinds of things centrally, or kind of in a cloud, in the cloud model. So I think what I've just got left here for the most part is just a little bit about Google, and there's a lot of information on the Beyond Corp website, which we've put up just and I think been a big contributor to around what we're doing and thinking about not trying to move away from this model of, okay, I've got an office building and I've got people in it and they've got a lot of devices and I need to keep that physically secure, and I've got a network that's there that needs to stay secure. I mean, certainly we still do all of those things too, but we recognize with such a mobile, kind of workforce, we need to kind of abstract from that physical kind of concept and move it much more to this cloud-based concept about like, who is the person, what are they trying to access through the apps, through what and how, through what physical device. And so these are the kind of the core components that kind of feed into our own algorithms about how we think about at any given time. What am I as a user kind of allowed to access, and what kind of proof points do I need to put forth, to the system for it to let me have access to something in particular. And so we've kind of created this tiering model. We've got our internal services. We've actually we've classified all of those, and then I, as a user, if I show up, if I'm on my at Google and at my desk and on an internal network, it's going to ask me a certain set of questions. It's going to factor all of that data in, and most likely it's going to give me access to anything I'm supposed to have access to, because it's doing a real-time analysis of the risk profile that I'm presenting. And again, if I'm physically there, that's a better risk profile than if I'm on some the MIT guest network or at some hotel network, or even worse, who knows, some coffee shop's open network. And if it's doing this in a super intelligent, in a very interestingly intelligent way, and I may not even know as a user, because it's doing a lot of calculations behind the scenes. So I may think I'm in a very similar environment to the one I was in yesterday, but there's signals that are telling Google something different about my particular setup, and so it may or may not give me access to particular corporate assets. So if I'm presenting a less secure set of characteristics to this algorithm, it will let me access the cafe menu for the cafe that I'm at, but I may not actually be able to get into certain corporate corporate sites. So I may not be able to see my paychecks or certainly access the code. But if I start to move to something that's if I'm in a slightly more secured environment, the wireless network I'm on is doing a better job of encryption, et cetera, then I can start accessing more information. Of course, when I'm on a corporate device and I have got my two-factor authentication and it's just recently checked it again, because it's interesting. You see how often you're asked for your password or asked to relog in for certain things. It's factoring more information into this algorithm to decide, all right, now I can actually check some code back in, and it's going to let me access these different things. So this is very high-level example of kind of how we think about this tiering and this model, but it's trying to abstract from just, okay, I need to secure things within here, and then it's a different story over here, but to make it much more dynamic and flexible. And if I'm carrying with me a corporate enrolled device, then I can have access to certain things. And our IT department loves the Chromebooks because they have in many ways the easiest way of ensuring that those devices are following the correct policies and that they're up to date, just like in any other org. And so we've been talking to them to figure out if that can actually provide better levels of access to things, because we can know that users are actually more secure. So just to wrap things up, and then happy to take more questions. We obviously think endpoints are critical to your cloud strategy. It's great to start thinking about the cloud, but if you've still got folks on kind of older endpoints and not thinking about the strategy of how those users are going to stay secure, then a piece of the puzzle just isn't there. And we think about it in terms of these layers, but whether it's at the browser level, the OS level, or the physical device level, we think that all of those, you need to think about all of those aspects of it in terms of your overall device and endpoint strategy. And then there's starting to think about these tiers, and many of you may be doing this already or have another model, which I'd actually love to hear more about. But this is one way in which we've really seen that this can, you can kind of use, you're all going to have a heterogeneous environment unless you're pretty small, right? Of what kind of browsers you have, what kind of devices you have, probably what kind of OSs you have. So how can you look at that and factor that into a model where you can think about, okay, here's my algorithm for what I can trust when, and here's how I can then start giving the right access to the people at the right time that you feel is still securing your corporate assets, but they're able to get their work done. So I think that's all I have here. And I'd love to hear any other questions or comments, and if there's any in the room. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, when large companies deploy these devices, they want to put on a number of endpoints: security endpoints, inventory endpoints, DLP, all these other things. They're complaining about the fact that they have to put on so many, and that affects their performance. The interoperability of multiple vendors, endpoints, and really want to go back to the OS folks, and they're providing software in these devices, asking them, how do you test these things? Is your strategy to provide an endpoint with multiple functions, or to test all your third parties? How do I know I don't want to get in a situation when performance degrades or the thing just breaks? And that's a big complaint we've heard a lot.
Yeah, I think there's a few aspects to that. I mean, some of it is, depending on the operating system, you also may, some of those things will be built in or not even needed. Just depend. And so that's something to look at, I think, when you're looking at the kind of the OS layer of the strategy. And obviously, you're not going to turn everything over to a new one overnight, but it's something to think about for kind of longer term and what can work for folks. And then I think you also have to look at, probably also part of that OS strategy is how are you able to do that testing, and what support can they give you around it? I know we have probably like the others have kind of models with our third-party partner, particularly third-party app developers, and how what they do, and there's parts that we can test and that they can test, and ensuring that those cycles happen in sync, and just so I think understanding what that looks like for these different tools and what you can do internally to kind of test your environments is also pretty critical. So some of that probably is just kind of the blocking and tackling. But I think the more interesting thing is if you can have look to see if there's an option that builds a lot of that in and just reduces the number of different different kinds of additional applications that you might need to deploy.
Enterprises are now looking at the decision of which devices they'll use based upon how the vendor addresses interoperability issues and additional endpoint functionality. I just bring that up from what I hear.
No, that's really good feedback.
So just a thought. That's why the question and why it's important to offer something that can have it tested.
Interesting. Thank you. All right. Yeah.
Is Chrome Enterprise hardware specific operating system?
So no, actually, so you can use sort of the enterprise layer with any Chrome device. So any device running Chrome, I should say. And we actually work with, we have first-party hardware made by Google, but we also work with all of the major OEMs, HP, Dell, Lenovo, Acer, Asus, et cetera. And so any device that you pick up, whether you buy it from a reseller in kind of more classic enterprise way, or if you went down to Best Buy and bought a few devices, you could then buy a Chrome Enterprise license to go with that. So, the Chrome OS is consistent across all of these devices. We don't have a Chrome Home and Chrome Pro, and that's not the OS is standardized, which actually makes it much easier for us to make sure it stays up to date and consistent across all of the devices that we've got deployed. Whether it's a consumer or enterprise or school device, and then so we've kind of abstracted out the management layer as a set of additional capabilities that are kind of provisioned from the cloud that can help organizations manage these fleets of devices, or incorporate them into whatever their management, kind of model is. Yeah.
About management, you mentioned that you know integration with Active Directory, but general directory services. From directory services perspective, policies deployment, software deployment, is it supported?
We're working on more of that. So I would say right now more of our focus has been on kind of enabling the identity aspects of Active Directory, but we're working to figure out how we can also support more of the management aspects of Active Directory, if that makes sense. Yeah, I know it's work that's ongoing. So I would say, over the next, certainly over the next 12 months, you'll be seeing kind of more releases from us about and just information from us about what we're able to do there. So, yeah.
So I'm using my Chrome browser on my iPad or my MacBook. I'm catching Gmail. Google is looking to see what I'm doing. They're harvesting the data. If I'm using Chrome Enterprise and I'm using Chrome browser on the device that's part of Chrome Enterprise, what happens to my data?
So if you're an enterprise user, and this is true for Gmail, enterprise Gmail as well, we're not looking at the data. Like, we don't look at the customer's data. So it's not, I know there's a perception that that's true, and there's more of that on the consumer side. I think that some of the information is used for ads and such. It's not done, we don't do that on the enterprise side. So when you sign up for G Suite, et cetera, that's just, we don't do that. And so we do have, access to information if we need it from a support standpoint. So if something's, awry or you're not sure what's going on, you can call us, and, with your permission, we can go in and look at things. But we've got very strict privacy rules about who can look at what. And in general, that's very true at Google, because we've been, I think, so much in the spotlight for these questions. We are amazingly careful about who gets to look at what and when, and track all of that internally to know who's looking at, if anyone's looking at anything, and are very, very careful for all of those reasons. So.
If I've got one of my executives who's got a Chromebook, he's got an M&A deal, it fails, he needs to get support. look at the operating system without being able to access the user data?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually some of the beauty of the way it's stored in the cloud, right? I mean, if he needs to look at the OS, right, he's not looking at that user's drive files. Yeah, he needs to solve whatever the problem is. I mean, unless there's something in a drive file, in a file that is the source of the problem. But it sounds like, if this is an operating system issue, then we don't care about what's stored over there. What we need to look at is, what was going on that drove whatever the particular issue that was there. So if it's something about a policy that's not working right, we can just purely look at that organization's policies and sort out like what might have been driving that particular issue. But yeah, that's the way our cloud storing the policies is very separate from the cloud, like where the data, like the files and such on the device are stored.
So if the data is, CMA will exec,
Yeah.
his files go up to the cloud, it's based on his user, his password, that's the encryption key. Who else can see that data? Let's
Well,
say
we should never-
whatever
yeah,
gets-
yeah.
He gets hit by a beer truck. Can anybody else ever access that data if they don't know his password?
So only folks in the corporate side who are that the admin corporate side. And this is true whether you're using Chromebooks or not in the G Suite model if you've set that up. So in general, there's you have because it's corporate owned data, it's not that individual owned data. So as a corporate admin, whoever has those appropriate admin rights that are set up by IT can look at users' data, but Google doesn't go in and look at the users' data.
Google doesn't, by policy, doesn't have the ability.
I don't even know. I don't actually. I'm not on the G Suite side. I'll have to. I would be. I mean, maybe there's some mechanism, and some very well tracked mechanism to do so. But I would be surprised. But I could go find out more. And we don't want the liability of touching that. So
It's difficult to.
Yeah.
It's difficult to keep that liability off.
Yeah.
In a practical problem-solving sense, it's difficult to walk around it and never see it.
Fair enough. But I can certainly say from the Chrome OS side, that's we're in a it's I think very logically separated in terms of what would ever need to be seen to troubleshoot a device from that kind of data. Yeah.
Stepping on his
Yeah.
So say you have a Windows environment in the office and you install Google Chrome Enterprise on all your endpoints. Will the data be, will your, we still benefit from the privacy aspects of what you were describing? Or would you
Yeah.
have to lock it down so that Google couldn't see what you were actually doing?
So what that would mean is that for your for your Windows or we'll say non-Chrome OS devices, that would mean you're managing Chrome browser on those devices. So you will get a set of user policies that you can manage on that you can manage Chrome browser on your Windows devices, and so you'll have kind of all of that security and privacy for the Chrome. For those kind of Chrome browser instances on the device. We're not really doing anything on the rest of the Windows device, to be clear. But you would get that if that Windows user on Chrome browser was using G Suite for email or writing docs or whatever, all of that would apply if they were an enterprise user. And then of course it would alter. Yeah.
Whether you have G Suite or not?
So if you're managing Chrome browser, and you will get access to, if it's a G Suite user, so if you're using Google Identity, then you'll have it, and then you're using G Suite. If you're managing the browser without, I'm trying to think if you're managing the browser without G Suite and just looking at that and you're using your Active Directory, then we don't have access to your user data anyway. We're just helping you set policies on the browser.
That sort of stuff, tracking what people are doing on their Google web browser.
As far as I understand it, no, we're not tracking the enterprise kind of users on the browser, but I can also clarify that too if that would help. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Picking up on that.
Yeah.
In that model, which supersedes what? In other words, Active Directory has group policies.
Yeah.
So on and so forth, and are you extending that to be separate Google pieces of the puzzle, or are you working with Active Directory? It's unclear,
Oh yeah, so there are different. I think that ultimately there are different ways we can set it up, and so we can take this one offline too to talk about kind of the different models of using Active Directory either with browser or with the OS, and then some of the things that we're working on to extend that. But we want to be able to support the model that you want, and so some orgs are thinking about how they could move from like AD to G Suite, or some are just happy with AD and just want things to work. And so depending on that, we can help set up different models of login management, et cetera. But we provide, for example, today management capabilities for Chrome browser in group policy objects. And so that's actually the way probably the largest number of orgs today manage the browser is through GPO. Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, I just want to thank everybody for all of your time. And yeah, if you have any further questions, happy to give folks my card and look up the answer if I don't have it. But again, thank you very much.